Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for taking the time to join us for our webinar. Today, we're going to be focused on Attivo Networks, and we're very fortunate today that we have Mike Parkin, who's a product marketing engineer for Attivo, and we'll talk about Mike in just a second. But again, my hope today is that you'll find this webinar very educational and full of good information. My plan is to spend just a quick moment talking about who Intuitive Technology Groups is, and then put the information or put the ball in Mike's hand to give you as much information as we can about Attivo and how deception technology can really help in terms of securing your infrastructure. So with that, a quick word on Intuitive Technology Group. We've been around for about 13 years at this point. And we have developed into an organization that focuses on 4 very closely related areas. We do help businesses with their lean, agile transformations. And under that umbrella, we help a lot of organizations integrate their DevOps practices and tie security tightly into that. We help organizations look at their data, determine what directions they should be going and drive those decisions. And we tie it all together with security. And that is really the cornerstone of where Intuitive grew up as an organization. One of the nice things that also is that we have the ability to engage with our clients either at the level of simply providing you with some advice or stepping in and helping you do projects, or even going ahead and providing you with the ongoing staffing that you need for your organization. We certainly are aware that not only many developers, but many security analysts are very difficult to find right now, and we've gotten pretty good at finding them. So certainly as you have those types of needs within your organization, please do consider the Intuitive Technology Group and how we might be able to help you with technologies such as the ones that we're focused on today. So with that, I would like to actually hand the ball over to Mike to take over, but I'd like to tell you a little bit about him first. Mike's roots go back over 20 years, and he's had the opportunity to not only be in the operations side of IT, but also to really delve into the security side. And blessedly, he did that in the early 2000s as a lot of these technologies were evolving, and really understands where many of today's technologies come from. And he'll be going into a lot of that. But he's had the opportunity through his career to work with not only a lot of gigantic private organizations and mid-sized and small-sized organizations, but also with folks in the public sector as well. So he understands the different needs that many of these organizations have, as well as the similar needs that many of these organizations have. He's also had the chance to work with both being a black hat as well as a white hat in terms of the types of activity that he's done. He's played in both the pen testing side as well as in the defense side. So he understands how many of the hackers deal with their mindsets and how they go after things. And due to that, he has the expertise to explain how many of these technologies can be used to really put the ball back in the bad guys' court and force them to defend their actions and keep them out of your network. So I think you're going to find today's conversation very, very interesting, very informative. And with that, I really don't want to take any more of Mike's time. I know that we only have a limited amount of time today. So Mike, if you're prepared, please feel free to take over the screen share as well as say hello to the group.
Thanks, Mike. I'm good here. Can everybody hear me okay? I hope you can. I'm going to take over your screen share here and bring up my own deck, which hopefully you can see now.
We can.
Introduction, everything. I am Mike Parkin from TiVo Networks. I'm product marketing manager, product marketing engineer. The title is flexible. As Mike said, I've got a background in security. I went into IT professionally in the mid 90s, went into security professionally in around 2000, security operations into penetration testing, into vulnerability research, and then from there migrated into being the technical asset on a marketing team and doing presentations like this, where my role is to really educate people on the natures of the technologies and the nature of the threats they're facing and how to deal with them. So I'm going to spend a few minutes here. I'm going to go over what TiVo brings to the table on some points. I'm going to go into a bit of what deception is all about and why deception is such an effective tool in the defense of your networks and environment, and why it can stop attackers ways other things can't. And I'm going to cover a little bit of some use cases and things we've actually seen in the field with some of our own customers and how they've used TiVo to protect their networks. I do like to run an interactive session when possible, so I have the question and answer boxes open if you want to jump down there and drop a question. If I can get to it in real time, I will. Mike may have some questions that he can inject as we go. If I can get to it in real time, I'll get to it in real time. If there's something that I will be bringing up later, I may gloss over your question until I get to it. I've arranged some time at the end. So without further ado, let me get started here. So some quick background on the company. Attivo has been around for a while now. We started shipping product in 2014. It's one of the earliest commercial deception products on the market. Pretty well received. We're kind of the 800-pound gorilla of the deception market. There aren't a lot of people doing what we do, and we're actually quite good at it. So the question maybe asked is, why deception, right? Where is this all coming from? And this really comes from the fact that the battle has moved more inside the network. It's not so much a fight on the perimeter as it has been for years. Usually the investment had been on perimeter defenses, historically the firewalls and proxies and things like that out on your edge. And then people were putting in antivirus and endpoint defenses and things like that on the endpoints, but people were getting through the network. Attackers were consistently getting through the network. And the reality is, it takes generally less than 5 hours for an attacker to get into your network. I've seen professionals, I've done it myself, where an attacker can get in as little as 20 minutes. Can be even shorter than that with the right social engineering. You can get in very rapidly. And it actually takes typically less than 15 hours from the time someone has broken in to your network to the time they've managed to find what they're looking for and exfiltrate the initial data. 15 hours, that's on average. The current, the MTrends report, the last one said it was 78 days in the United States was the average between the time of a breach and the time an organization became aware that there was a breach. So it's pretty obvious that people are getting in and they're staying in. So having some form of comprehensive detection is really an important factor to consider. Next stage is 4.5 hours to break out, and that's not to get out of the network entirely. That's to get off of that initial breach. They've landed. They've compromised a host. Somebody went to a website they maybe shouldn't have gone to, or didn't know that it was infected. They opened an email. We've all seen people do it. And they've got that initial host. It's typically about 4.5 hours from the time they get that initial breach until the time they've made their first foothold on another host within the network. That's an average. Again, I've seen people do it in a matter of minutes. 60% of the attacks involve lateral movement. Statistically, I actually think that's low from my own experience. It's generally much higher. I would probably say it's closer to 80 from personal experience. And one of the things that was fairly notable was that they've shown that 64% of attackers will come back to the network. And why not? They know your network. They've been there before. They know what you're vulnerable to, and it's easier for them to get back in. So one of the things you need to yeah, take care of is the fact that they've got the ability for time and search, right? They're going to use deception to get in, the phishing emails, things like that, social engineering. They have the ability of time and research. If your company has a presence in the internet, and everyone does, as Mike was showing you, the website here, right at the beginning of our presentation, there's information on the network, right? You can go to LinkedIn, you can go to Facebook, you can go to all these places and find information. So there's a ton of information available out there. And you need to realize that the attackers are going to leverage that information to get in. So something else to understand is that detection needs to be universal. Our networks are no longer homogeneous. It's not the firewall, the servers, and everybody using their desktop. It's not what it used to be, right? We've got a very, very heterogeneous environment where we've got Macs and PCs and Android tablets and iPhones and all these different kind of devices. Plus we've got the big servers, running in our data center. We've got the cloud. We've got connections directly to the cloud. We've got IoT devices. We've got cameras. We have SCADA devices. We have all sorts of different devices in our networks. The Nest, the picture shows the little Nest thermostat here. I'm doing a remodel at home. We just added a Nest thermostat to our house. And something I given another talk about, I'm sure you've all seen those really, really nice Samsung refrigerators with the browser on the front. They've got that big color screen on the front door where you can watch television, Netflix, whatever, do your grocery list. That's an Android tablet that's connected to your network and is potentially hackable. How many people consider that the touchpad on the front of the refrigerator in their company's break room is a potential point of entry? Not many people recognize that as being something that's potentially a problem. And with so much out there, it can really feel overwhelming to understand that there's so many different points of entry. There's so many different things that we need to be able to detect. With the attackers who know all of this stuff, and they're trying to leverage all these different ways to get into your environment, to get to their target, to exfiltrate the information, to conduct an attack of some form that may be damaging, or maybe going after your company's crown jewels. Fairly.
Hey, Mike.
Yes.
Mike, I apologize. You actually got muted there for a second, and we missed the last probably 30 seconds or so of what you just said.
Okay. Starting at this slide or the previous slide?
Just right at the start of this slide.
Okay, no problem. We'll pick it up again, Mike. All good. Thank you for letting me know. I didn't notice.
Okay.
So, as I was saying, what detection option is the best to deal with? I admit to some bias. Deception, I've been dealing with deception for quite a number of years now, and it's the kind of thing that would catch me when I was an attacker. It's very effective against your basic level of attacker. It's very effective against an advanced attacker. Again, someone who's a professional is going to either trip over it directly or spend an incredible amount of effort to avoid it. It's very efficient. IDS, classic intrusion detection systems, are really effective against your basic attacker. An advanced attacker knows how to bypass IDS, knows how to sneak under the radar and maneuver under the radar to get past it. It's effective. It's not super expensive, so it's moderately efficient. Again, it's very effective against your basic attacks, your scanners and things like that. Behavioral analysis. Behavioral analysis, again, it's advanced attackers. Depending on how they're configured, you're going to have a better time catching advanced attackers that you're not necessarily going to get with some of the other solutions other than deception. But efficiency, again, it's not the most efficient way to go. Threat hunting. We've actually got a team whose job it is to go through the network, go through the environment, and see what's there. Look for the bad guys. You know, it's an organic person, somebody skilled in security operations, in a SOC, on a threat hunting team, however they're dealing with it. They're very effective. They're very, very expensive. You know, you've got the dedicated headcount, you've got the dedicated time, the amount of effort it goes into. You're spending as much effort more to keep the bad guys out than the bad guys are spending to get it. So it's not the most efficient way to go. It's great if you've got the luxury of doing it. Everything audio good? Still good, Mike?
Yeah. So what I heard out of that was the question boils down to, it's not a question of if you're going to get hacked, it's a question of when.
Yeah.
And do you have the resources to go after setting the mousetraps to
exactly.
Identify the folks who are in house. And for most organizations, they feel the only thing they can do is to just go ahead and hire a red team and hire a blue team and try to, you know, basically sink their entire IT budget just on trying to fight intruders.
And
you're suggesting that perhaps there might be something else.
That's generally not practical for most organizations.
Right. Exactly.
Anyway, moving on. Get my screen back here. So the way people expect it, right? You're going to put the firewalls in, your IDS, everything will be fine. A couple guys in SecOps. That's exactly what companies do, and that's exactly what the attackers expect. But what companies need is that wolf in sheep's clothing. You need something that turns the tables on the attackers, so the attackers no longer have the advantage they once had. That's where deception comes into play. And this is why people think deception, a lot of people think of honeypots. Think of honeypots as the version 1.0, while we're at version 7.5 now. Honeypots were great in their day, but they're not what they were anymore. Honeypots were originally designed primarily for research. Some of them were low, some types were low interaction, some types were high interaction. Again, low authenticity, high, depending on what it was, but they lived on the edge of the network. And the more authentic they were, the more interactive they were, the more effort they took to set up. And they took a lot of effort to set up in the early days. Modern deception technology, it takes the abilities that a honeypot had to look like something real that an attacker could engage with and lets it go to scale. So you can operate at a global scale. You can automate it, integrate it with your incident response solutions. It's very easy to operate. You can integrate with the Active Directory. It's very authentic because if you're doing it right, you're using, if you really want to go all the way, you're using gold disk images that are literally copies of what you're using on your environment. But very least, you're using real operating systems. You've got the network, you've got credentials, and these things don't live on the edge. They live inside the network because your real threat is not what's bouncing off your firewall. Until they get through your firewall, it's interesting to know who's trying to attack you and why, but until they get through your firewall, they're not really the problem. Once they're inside, they become a much greater problem. So where this fits in your security stack is inside the network. Your classic perimeter security is going to be your, the firewall, intrusion prevention, et cetera, AV on the edge, come through the DMZ. Now you're inside the network, and we fit inside the network. Deception fits inside that network space. So when an attacker starts poking and prodding, trying to figure out what's going on, they are actually, rather than poking and prodding, they're tripping over things that are actually hostile to them and they think they're benign. I'm going to go into a little bit more depth on that in a few slides, kind of better explanation. So this is kind of the attack life cycle. You get that initial compromise where they manage to break in either through some form of remote exploit, which is actually becoming less and less common. More often, it's some kind of an email, that there's a phishing email, that they drop malware, or there was a drive-by, web drop. Somebody went to a website that had been compromised, or a website they probably shouldn't have gone to, ended up getting a drive-by there, got their system compromised. Once that initial compromise happens, the attacker needs to establish a foothold. They want to find a way to set it up so that they can stay inside. They're going to establish their back channel command and control connections. They're going to establish their probably encrypted connection in order to get their data back out. When they go back out, they're going to install backdoors, and they're going to start spreading around the network a little bit. They're going to try to escalate their privileges. They're going to try to get control of AD or whatever you're using internally. If you're not using AD, some organizations don't. Notably, Linux and Unix shops are using other alternatives. But what they're going to do is they're going to try to get their privilege. Kind of the crown jewels for them is getting control of Active Directory. If they can get admin access to Active Directory, they got it made. They have all the keys to the kingdom. They can go wherever they need to go. And they start looping through, right? They're starting to do the internal reconnaissance, figure out what's where, figure out how to get to that final stage of whatever it is they're after, whether it's a ransomware attack, whether it's they're trying to get your data, whether they're trying to get your payroll, whether they're trying to plant stuff on point of sale terminals so they can skim credit cards, whatever it is. They're going to try to move laterally and keep that foothold and keep moving and get more and more entrenched into your network. They're going to complete their mission and get the data out or get the information out or do their damage, but chances are they're not actually going to leave. They're going to stay there because they've got you. Why would they want to give that up? They're going to want to keep it for later. So deception works in a number of ways, and or an extra number of aspects. One of them is risk mitigation. We don't talk about that a lot of times, but for an organization, there's so many different things that organizations need to deal with from a risk standpoint. This is the kind of stuff that keeps the CISO up at night. So what we provide, what deception provides, is very high fidelity detections. Right? If somebody's touching one of a deceptive asset, it's a bad thing. It gives you the ability, gives your defenders much more powerful tools to be able to not necessarily counterattack. If you're not a government entity yourself, you aren't actually generally allowed to counterattack. But within your network, you can shut them down and kick them out and send them off and send reports off to law enforcement so they can shut them down for you. But it gives you some defenses that you wouldn't have otherwise, and it lets you reduce the risk. So you're going to get very early detection in network. You're going to get the ability to assess your controls, security controls. When you get your red team coming in or your pen testers coming in, you'll be able to see what they're doing. You're actually going to be able to pull forensics out of the endpoints, or when an attacker compromises one of the decoy systems, that's actually great. Let them compromise the decoy system. They're in a fully contained environment. You now can see what they're doing, understand what they're doing, what they're after, and what technologies and techniques they're using. So you can actually reinforce your own internal defenses from there. Gives you instant analysis capability from the forensics, lets you contain them and reduce the risk, because when they try to return, you already know what they're after. You may not have known what they were after before, because you generically know, but now you know the specific vulnerabilities they're taking advantage of, so you can actually deal with those specific vulnerabilities. And now you have a much better idea of your attack surface. A lot of organizations are moving towards risk reduction with the various frameworks. So there's the ISO, MITRE, attack framework, cybersecurity framework. These different frameworks, one of the things that's kind of cool about these is that with actually some of the legislature out there, with some of the laws that have come into effect, if you can show that you have followed all of the appropriate frameworks, I did due diligence, I did all the steps, I did everything I was supposed to do, it actually reduces liability, reduces risk, reduces something. I'm not a lawyer, so you can't quote me as to exactly what it is. Have to do the research on that, but it's a fact. If you're following the standards, one, it reduces your risks a bunch, and two, it may actually reduce your liability. And deception actually maps into these frameworks. As a deception is involved, as these frameworks have evolved, deception is evolved and fits into them quite nicely.
Mike, I'm glad you brought that up because that's something that we've seen with a number of our customers. They're no longer talking about, I just need to patch all my systems. They're talking about, I need my systems compliant to industry standards. And for their purpose, this is about data governance. This is about audits. And so for those companies that are publicly traded companies, this is a big, big deal that extends well beyond simply the IT space and just trying to protect IT assets. But this is now talking about the health of the company's stock price, having the FTC or having other folks show up at your door and have you explain why things happen. So this is stuff that goes into the boardroom. I'm really glad you brought this up.
Exactly. And yeah, this is something that's, we've actually been making more of a push to show the fact that deception as a technology, as part of the solution, is effective and does map into the various frameworks. There's actually one of the articles on our website actually talks about how we map. So I think it's specifically to MITRE on that one.
I'm glad you brought that up. By the way, we'll make sure that as a follow-up, we are recording this webinar and we'll make it available afterwards, but we'll also make sure that some of those handy links that come up during the conversation get sent to all of our participants as a follow-up. So again, thanks everybody for attending, and sorry for the interruption.
It's okay. As I said right at the beginning, I don't mind an interactive session. So this is kind of an abstract view of what it looks like, how deception fits into this. And I've actually got a couple kind of abstract slides, and I've got a more concrete view coming up. But the concept is the attacker is going to get through the firewall, and now they're going to start trying to maneuver through the network. And what they're going to see is what they expect to see. The thing is, what they expect to see may not necessarily be real. And as soon as they step on one of these traps, these are things that a regular user is never going to see. This is always only going to be something that someone doing something malicious, or at the very least a policy violation, I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, is doing something they shouldn't be doing. So you've got a very high authenticity, they hit the trap, and now you've got an alert that's based on an actual engagement. And the attacker has been disrupted from getting to the target assets they're trying to get. So your security guys know something is actually going on, not just some random scroll. If you ever watched something like ArcSight running in a SOC, you'll just see this scroll of events that are usually color-coded, and you watch the SOC technicians trying to pick out the ones that are important. And what this does is this gives you nothing but important. Not all of them are malicious, but they're all noteworthy. But again, this is a little bit of an abstract slide. From the perspective of how the architecture is set up, you've got real assets, whether they're hosts, whether they're shared resources, whether they're cloud resources, applications, IoT devices, whatever they are. You've got bait, lures, data and decoy, data decoys, application decoys, host decoys, credentials that are fake credentials that are on a workstation that we've planted there, so that when an attacker gets on the workstation and scrapes the credentials trying to get to that, their holy grail of getting to admin access on AD, they see admin access on an AD server, which is not real. So when they get there, they're actually going right into a decoy rather than the real thing. And you have an immediate response that, okay, somebody has taken from this host, they've taken this identity, they've tried to log into this server. So we know that this host has been compromised, and we know there's an attacker there, and they're trying to get into Active Directory. Immediately, we know it's very accurate. So we're laying the breadcrumbs out. Gives the ability to detect and analyze things, what's happening, going on, reduces the dwell time, so we're catching the attackers much more rapidly than usual. We're getting authenticated alerts that are highly validated, and your response time for your incident response team is going to be very low. And if you are allowing them to act for a while in the decoy, completely optional, but you can actually gain a fair amount of counterintelligence on your attacker. You can understand what they're trying to do. So where this is coming in, where deception itself comes in, is we're kind of turning the tables on them. We're taking a page right out of the bad guy's playbook. Kind of that reverse phishing email, right? We're going to exploit the fact that most attackers, when they get onto the network, believe that what they see is what they get. They see hosts, they're real hosts. They see credentials, they're real credentials. Since they don't know what's real and what's not, they're apt to make mistakes. They're going to trip over these things. If they actually understand that there may be deception involved, there are things they can do to try and adapt that, with not particularly high levels of success, but they can still try and work the way around deception. They have to take that extra time. Is this real? Is this not real? Now you're wasting their time. Now you're slowing them down dramatically, and they're still going to trip over things because they don't know what's real and what's fake. They're going to be more careful, but they're still going to trip over the things because they can't tell the difference between a real machine, a decoy, a real credential, and a fake credential. Basically makes it much more difficult for them. If they're seeking a target of opportunity and they look at it and go, this is costing me a lot, they're going to divert. They're going to go to a cheaper target. They're going to go to someone they can just throw a bot at rather than somebody that they actually need to work for. Harder you got to work at it, the less desirable the target is. Unless they want something very specific from you, they're going to probably shift to another target. If they do want something very specific from you, they're going to stay, but they've also made their job. Deception makes their job so much harder, and it makes your incident response team much more powerful. You've got a force multiplier so they can see what's going on. But these have been kind of abstract. I said I was going to get into a little bit more reality. So here's a little bit more reality for you. So this is what an attacker sees on a typical network, right? They're coming in through the firewall, they get to that initial host, and once they get to the initial host, they start working their way through the network until they get to their eventual target. In this case, it's something on a server. They get to the target, they get the information off the server. This is very abstract, but this is what a network looks like to them. And there'd be switches and routers and everything else in there. Just get too cluttered if I showed everything. This is the concept, right? This is what a bad guy sees. Now, if the environment has deception in place, it looks very similar, right? More machines, more hosts, more things living in the network, but this is what they see, right? They just see a more populous network if there's deception in play. But what's really going on is a bit different, because what they see is not what they get. A lot of these hosts are actually deceptive hosts. They get that first host, they try to maneuver around, and they end up running into these traps very quickly because they're finding there's deceptive credentials. We put deceptive credentials on all the endpoints. There are decoy hosts scattered through the network, decoy servers, decoy workstations, etc., decoys in the cloud. So their chances of actually getting where they want to go without tripping over something is very, very slim. And it makes their life much, much more difficult. This is a great quote. And the attackers only have to be right once, while security people have to be right all the time. I don't know who that could actually be attributed to, because I believe that actually quote predates Mr. Goldworthy. But deception flips that paradigm on the head. Now the criminals need to be right all the time too. And that's from DJ Goldworthy from Aflac, who's one of our customers. And that's the reality. Right now, the attacker, I need to be right every time. If I touch even one decoy, I'm caught. The good guys know I'm there. I've lost the element of surprise. I've lost the element of stealth because I stepped on a figurative virtual landmine. So I'm going to shift gears here for a little bit. I'm kind of going to gloss over this section a little bit on some spots. So we're going to go through kind of talking about deception, how we make things, how we fit in, how we do what we do. I suppose I can spend a little bit more time on some of the case studies a little bit later in this. So we look at deception as a fabric. It's not just endpoints. It's not just decoys. It's not just deception with credentials, deceptive documents, things like that. We actually do a full deception suite, a full fabric. And we have it it's built around the deception server, which can be an appliance, can live in the cloud, it can be a physical or virtual appliance, and the ability to project into other environments. So we can project into the cloud, we can project into remote locations, we can project into the SCADA networks, the user network. We can do all these different areas. If you're say a retail business, you've got a headquarters, all of your data centers and things are at your headquarters, but you've got manager's office, point of sale terminals in each of your stores, then you can have the server, the deception core, living at headquarters in the data center at headquarters, and everything else is remote and just feeds back into it. So you cover everything. From a platform perspective, authenticity is actually very important. Making the system making the decoys look real is hugely important. If the decoys don't look real, they're very easy for an attacker to identify. They're not going to touch them. So we run across a full range of platforms, the operating systems that actually come with the box. Or when we include Windows, we include Linux, etc., are built right in. Mac, we can't include Mac out of the box by default because of licensing issues. But if you have Gold Disk, if you want to put a specific operating system in a decoy, great. We offer that capability to do that. It's part of one of TiVo's advantages, technical advantages. We have a full set of services that are offered, and these aren't just things that I'm from our as a product perspective. These are things from the perspective of if I'm an attacker, right? I want to be authentic to the bad guys. So the bad guys are not easily identifying what's going on. You want to be able to have everything look real, and that's what this does. So you're putting memory credentials, you're putting user data in that looks real, you're putting docs that look real, you've got real services running that respond exactly the way they should because they are what they should be. Some cases, certain IoT devices and stuff you're actually emulating rather than trying to run a miniaturized, virtualized version of a webcam, but you've got that authenticity. So the attacker, when they're trying to get through your network, they actually are seeing what they expect. It's very, and admittedly, this is a very TiVo specific thing. One of the things that was built, you talked about, how we go through an entire network, how we blanket the entire environment. You'd think it would be very difficult to do that. It's actually not. The products were designed with the idea of being able to be very easy to deploy, bring the system up, put it on a trunk port, covering the VLANs that you want to protect, and let it listen for a while. And it will identify what's out there. And after a little while, it will go, okay, here's what I heard here are the VLANs that I heard activity on. Here's what lives on those VLANs. Here's what I think will be the best set of decoys to put out there. Here's what your Active Directory looks like. This is the way I suggest you do this. And it will do it for you pretty much with the touch of a button. Not quite one click, but it's very, very easy to work with, and it can continuously adapt. Some of the other capabilities is that it gives you efficiency. So very efficient, very useful by giving you high fidelity alerts. I've worked in security operations, understanding that this alarm I just got is real. It's not just the IDS throwing a fit again, is a very powerful tool, very, very useful to your incident response team. You're able to collect forensics, do automated analysis if you want to, right? We have a full set of information sharing tools. So if you have an existing security stack, chances are very good deception can integrate easily and almost automatically with your existing security stack. It's usually just a matter of saying, okay, you've got a Cisco or a Fortinet or a Juniper or a Palo Alto firewall, or whatever tool you're running, Carbon Black on the endpoints, whatever. It's very easy for us to integrate with that to the point where we can say an event happens and we pass the information on the event up to the other tools. So now you can fully automate that. Management is very simple. You can actually manage the whole stack from a single pane of glass. But I don't want to spend that much time on the producty stuff. Comprehensive threat intelligence. It's got a really nice UI. Very easy to understand what's going on. Very easy to identify things and drill down. If you'd like a demo, talk to Mike afterward, and I'm sure he can get you set up with a demo and can show you what this actually looks like in practice. Corroborated attack information. You can show you what's going. This is something we've actually added fairly recently. Is a new way of viewing it where we consolidate everything, which is actually really cool. It gives you the ability to retrace what was going on for improved threat hunting down the line, let you see what's going on. It's very, very cool. Intelligence response side. So we've got the ability to do forensics on what an attacker is doing. If they engage with one of the decoys, now you can set it up so that as soon as they engage, you just punt them off, but you can actually set it up safely so that an attacker can engage with the decoy and play in the decoy, and you can let them play in the decoy to identify what they're doing and use that to your advantage later. It's a very powerful tool. As I mentioned, the ability to work with other security vendors. So integration, automatic repeatable playbooks. If you see something going on, touch of a button, I want you to do this. And it can be, I run forensics from my endpoint tool. I isolate them from my smart switch. I block everything at the proxy that had been going out to the command and control traffic that I identified on the decoy. And I now look for any other communication. So if any other system on my network has been tried to communicate with that, I now have an idea of where they were going so I can see if there's any other compromised host. It's very effective.
Mike, I'm glad you brought this up because this is one of the key things, particularly when you've got organizations that are stretched. The security staff has 18 different tools to work with and to be able to have the quick integration, but also reduce the response time. To be able to automate those responses is so critical that it gets to the point where you can take a look at simply having a partner or having somebody on your staff set these things up, set your responses up, but then be able to simply execute the response rather than having to have a huge staff available and get three different folks involved in order to reset a firewall setting or to forward information out or as you suggest, just boot the intruder.
Exactly. One of our customers,
this is one of the key things
on the East Coast, their entire incident response team is 2 people for a huge university network, and they rely very heavily on our system for identifying what's going on with the deception, and then you leverage the integration with the rest of their security stack to very rapidly be able to contain this with a very small staff for a very large environment. And this is just a list of some of the other parts of the security infrastructure that we can integrate with. Juniper and Cisco, 2 of the companies I used to work for back in the day. Orchestration, Splunk, Demisto, any of the SIMs we're actually able to integrate with. Logarithm, McAfee, we do a lot with McAfee, Carbon Black. These are all different built-in integrations, and this isn't all of them. We're adding more all the time. When I'm done here, I have to go write another report on how we're integrating with somebody. So adding more capability, better fit into that overall infrastructure. So your whole security stack becomes much more effective. Like I said, it's a force multiplier. So network visibility, this lets you really see what's going on in your network over time, because we're listening to the network and we're showing how our decoys fit with that network, fit within the network. We actually have one of our capabilities is Threat Path. Threat Path actually lets you look at how Active Directory permissions to different devices are set up in such a way that you can follow. So if I compromise this host, I can jump to this host, to that one, to that one. From that one, I can get over to this server. From this server, I can get to this other server. So you can actually see the pathways visualized that an attacker could take to get through your network. It's a very powerful tool. It's one of those things that, back when I was doing SecOps, I would have loved to have had. It didn't exist back then. You had to kind of figure it out manually, usually on a whiteboard. So this is one of the things I talked about early on about what a customer's saying. Don't have as much time as I'd hoped for, but we'll hopefully be able to get through everything. So this is what some of our organizations who are actually using deception have actually seen in the field. Okay, this was a customer who was was a healthcare customer. They were worried about insider threats on their internal network. And they were looking at a number of different things. This one had come in and they had SMB shares that were connecting across different, such from zombies, scanning the network. And the deception solution was the only thing that was actually able to find that and accurately detect the recon capabilities, or the recon activity, sorry. And this was from an actual network administrator who had been doing this and dropped this stuff in the network to figure out, what he was doing for whatever purposes he was doing it, and ended up, getting cashiered for it. So it was an insider threat that was causing them problems.
I think this is really an important one to call out, though, because as we look at so many situations where you either have a disgruntled employee or perhaps you have an employee who well-meaning, but their credentials have been compromised. If you can't follow the path of the worker around the network, you have no idea that you're being exploited.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. This one's kind of near and dear to my heart, being a former penetration tester myself. This was a customer, financial services, who was actually concerned because the red team was walking all over them. Their blue team didn't have a lot the visibility they were hoping for. I've been in the position of being the red team walking all over the blue team, and feels great from being the attacker on the red team, and feels terrible when it's your own organization that you just broke. So these guys installed deception, didn't tell the red team. Why would they? And the pen tester we're doing their thing, having a field day. I got in, I got through, I got to this endpoint, I did this stuff, I got to a server, everything was great. And at the end of it, they're going, yeah, here's where you hit the decoy. This is where you stole this is where you stole the credentials. This is where you hit the decoy. And these are all the things you did on the decoy. We saw you do it every step of the way. Now, red team, blue team isn't the same as a InfoSec team against a live attacker, but a good red team simulates what a real attacker is doing. They look as real as they can be. So this was a very effective show of how effective deception can be against a live attacker. This was for compliance, and with this in place, they're actually able to show that, look, and the pen testers couldn't get through. We were able to identify them. A real attacker, we'd have had the same results. And this was just something that, a quote we got from one of the pen testers. And the fact is, what you see is not what you get. And as an attacker, you expect that everything is what you think it is. And deception turns that on its head. So now everything you see is not what you think it is. So this one was an interesting thing in the retail space. Attackers had gotten in. They realized after the fact that attackers had gotten in, and the attackers had fully compromised Active Directory. They had full control. They had gotten keys to the kingdom. And what they ended up doing was installing deception into their network. When these new devices started coming up, the attacker, who already had control of AD, started looking and saying, okay, I'm seeing new devices coming up. What am I going to do about it? And they were actually able to leverage that with the attacker kind of exploring and probing to see what was coming up new, to see what who the attackers were, where they were going, and figuring out what accounts had been compromised and how they were doing and how they were going to clean it up. It was a very, very complex attack. It was a very, very complex cleanup. This said it's ongoing. Cleanup is ongoing. I think they're actually done at this point, but it was a very, very long. The bad guys had been in there for over a year, and it probably took them another couple of months after they had found, put the deception solution in to find everything and identify everything and get everything cleaned up. So that's something that would happen. If you can stop them early in the attack, the earlier the better. If you let them run around, it's going to be very difficult to actually stop them. And like I said, all deceptions are not created equal. There are a number of vendors in this space. We all do things a little bit differently, and capabilities can vary quite widely between the deception platforms. Attivo is actually the most comprehensive solution. So, talking about the depth of deception, what kind of variety, how believable is it, what attack surfaces we're covering, how easy is it to use, what analysis and forensics capabilities are available, how much it helps you out with incident response, and how useful it is in threat assessments and attack simulations, the red team, blue team thing. And these are things actually, if you're considering deception, which honestly I hope you are, because just as even if it's not from us, I think that it's a very, very valuable tool. That's the SecOps guy in me and the pen tester in me talking. It's a very, very valuable tool for the defense. So these are the things to look at. Look at how does it cover your, stepping away from the slide for a moment. Does it cover your environment? Does it offer deception for the kind of devices that you have? If you're in the cloud, does it cover the cloud? If you've got a data center, does it cover the data center? If you're hybrid, how does it work covering both? Do you have a homogeneous environment? Are you an all Windows shop, all Mac shop? Are you a heterogeneous environment? Mac, Windows, tablets, etc. How good a job does the deception do at covering your full space? Does it do IoT devices? Does it do SCADA? If you have those, you may not. But something to think about. So kind of to sum everything up here, deception really is about detection, right? First and foremost, we get a lot of other things that come out of it. We can get forensics, we get adversary intelligence, we get a lot of other things. But the real strength is in very, very high fidelity detection. It scales even across a widely distributed heterogeneous environment. It can go into hybrid environments very easy. And not all deception technologies are created equal. And I honestly really do think this is the best. That's what Attivo's technology is what drew me to the company. I left another security firm to come here because I found the technology compelling. As a researcher, as a penetration tester, as a security operations veteran, I found deception technology to be a very, very compelling solution, a very powerful solution. So that is all that I have. We've got just a few minutes left. I am open for questions. I'm going to pop open my chat window as well here. And I noticed Mike popped in the chat window to say, go ahead and ask questions in the QA window. I have time for questions. If you don't have any questions, not a problem. Thank you all for attending. I appreciate your time. I appreciate you coming and listening to me. I will keep this open for just a couple minutes. Mike, when you're ready, go ahead and take it back, and we can go ahead and close it out.
That sounds good. I appreciate you bringing up a couple of case studies and a couple of customer examples. I think they tend to really resonate. I know I had spoken with another company who had to deal with a data breach, and I know they brought in many technologies to address that in terms of how to better secure the infrastructure. But one of the conversations that came out of it was the fact that when they decided to deploy deception technology, they, again, just to reiterate that quote, they pointed out we had to get everything right. We had an issue where we had a compromised account, and that allowed the person to traverse the network, jump VLANs, get to our keys to the kingdom, which in that case was a set of servers. And by employing the deception technology, while they had obviously blocked that particular path, they felt that now they had a way to ensure that any intruder had to be 100% right in order to get through their organization, whereas in the past, all they had to do was get in. And it just simply gave them the ability to root out those people who had gotten in and identify people who actually were coming, or other people who attempted to get in or may have gotten past one or two layers of defense or even all the way in. But quite simply just turning it around and giving the blue team some sort of advantage and make it not only about defense but about offense. But I was curious if you might have some other examples where you may have seen that this made a huge difference for a client.
These are one of the things that my boss, our chief marketing officer, chief deception officer, she sometimes calls herself, Carolyn, has a great quote where she says, the first rule of deception club is you don't talk about deception club. It's a technology that you'll have CISOs at a conference talk to each other about how they have it deployed, but it's very, very rare that people actually talk about it much. So we have a lot more cases that we know of that we can't really talk about, even as sanitized as they are. We have some in government. We have some in higher education that are actually kind of sensitive, what they found. So revealing it would be a little bit challenging. But that's one of the things I'll see what I can do for future presentations, see if I can get more case studies that I can actually talk about. These are the ones we know we're allowed to highlight.
Sure. No, I completely understand, and it absolutely would have to be a sanitized version. But I know that for those purposes, I had heard of another story where the issue was similar to a case study you brought up, where there was an employee who was traversing the network, going places they ought not, and that in of itself represents a data breach. And by having deception in place, not only did it prevent the outside bad actors, but the potential inside bad actors.
Exactly. And that was actually one of the, I made a comment earlier about not every event is malicious, but every one is significant. Most companies have some kind of policy in place that says, thou shalt not go searching through the network. And one of the things that the deception technology does is we will put hidden shares on hosts. So an attacker is going to go traversing those. There are some users who are, usually they're old school computer geeks like me, who will actually occasionally jump into a command line and run some command line commands and go, wait, why are these hidden shares here? Who put these on my system? I don't remember them being here. What's on them? And it's benign from a, whether it's criminal, whether it's somebody trying to do damage. They're not trying to do damage, but they are doing something that is actually right. They've looked at this file share and gone, what is this? And we've actually had cases. We've had cases where people got a talking to for doing it. We've had cases where somebody went to IT and went, what is this? Why are these shares? Why is the Q and L drive shared on my machine? I don't why is this here? Which is significant. Not necessarily malicious, but it is significant. And that's really the only case we ever come across where it's not, whether it's a non-malicious event, but it is in fact a policy violation, even though it's not malicious.
Sure. And I think what many people don't realize is that while it may not be intended as a bad thing, as soon as the data is looked at by the non-authorized party, the company's liable. The company has a potential risk. And so those types of things do need to be noticed and dealt with and addressed.
Exactly. So we're a couple minutes after. I haven't seen any questions pop up, so I figure our between the slides and our discussion, we've pretty much got everybody covered.
I would wholeheartedly agree. And Mike, I can't thank you enough for going through all this. I know this is a very complex topic. It's a little bit esoteric. It's a little bit shrouded in mystery and to some degree by necessity. But at the same time, as a security professional, to understand there are tools that can automate some of your threat detection and response, that can basically make life miserable for those people who are trying to do you harm and cause them, as you said, to either go find somebody else or identify themselves inadvertently, suddenly gives you as the security professional the upper hand and the ability to really go after the environment. So again, I can't thank you enough for calling that out to all of us to show us some examples of the technology. And for everybody on the call, please feel free to reach back to us for a demo or for an opportunity to understand more about this. We will make the presentation available both in the recording form as well as some of the links that we referred to. So please check back and watch your emails for some follow-up from us as well. And thank you everybody for your time today.
Thanks, Mike.
So with that, have a great afternoon, everybody.